Okay, welcome back. So Socrates has been through his trial. He's been convicted. He's been given a death sentence, and now he's sitting there in his cell. When Crito arrives, he finds Socrates to be quite cheerful. In fact, he's been asleep, sleeping peacefully. And he has dreamed that the next day his life will end. What I want you to do, we're not going to actually walk through this dialogue. What I want you to do is to work on this at home. Take a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle. On the left-hand side, write the ways that Crito tries to convince Socrates into leaving town and going into exile. And on the right-hand side, write Socrates' responses to Crito. So even though he's already been convicted, probably it's the case that his friends could easily slip him out of town and he could still get away completely. So we're not going to go through this together, but I want you to work on this on your own. Pay close attention to the part that begins at page 105 in the Allen text, or the marginal numbers 50a, where Socrates personifies the laws of Athens. And he says, look, Athens has raised me. Athens has given me an education. I have abided by the laws of Athens my whole life. Why now, when I'm 70 years old, would I turn my back on the laws and spurn the city of my birth? So work on that on your own, and we're gonna keep on going. We move on now to the Symposium. The Symposium is a really beautiful dialogue, and unfortunately we're not going to have time to do the entire dialogue. I would really recommend that you get your own copy and read the whole thing. This is only one speech from the Symposium. A symposium was a Greek dinner party, and this was a popular form of entertainment, especially among the upper classes, where they would get together and drink wine, have dinner, and the entertainment would oftentimes be speeches. They would also have flute girls and things like that, but giving speeches was a form of entertainment. The topic for the evening is love, and each guest at the dinner party gets up and gives a speech on love. There's a number of speeches in the dialogue. We're only going to do Socrates' speech from the Symposium. So, starting on page 142 in the Allen text, Socrates gets up to give his speech, but he says, you know, I actually don't have a speech of my own, but I tell you what, I met this woman named Diotima once, and she was a priestess from the town of Mantinea, and she told me a speech. So I don't really have my own speech, but let me tell you Diotima's speech. So this is a device that you'll frequently find in the dialogues. Remember that Socrates said that he doesn't have any special knowledge of his own, right? He claims to be completely ignorant, right? So how can he give a speech about love when he said that he's completely ignorant? Well, by giving someone else's speech. So this Diotima, I mean, is she a real person or not? Well, who knows? Certainly there were women who were in charge of temples. This is one of the areas where women could hold power in Greek society. For the most part, women were kept behind closed doors, but priestesses could be in charge of temples, and it was actually a pretty influential position. So we get this speech by Diotima. And first of all, we arrive at this idea that love, or eros, is a great divinity, and that this great divinity is responsible for giving gifts from the gods to men. And then we get this myth of poverty and plenty. This is one of my very favorite parts of the dialogue. So Eros, or love, is the son of Poros and Penia, plenty and poverty. So let's just read part of that beginning at 102c in the middle there. Because then Eros is the son of Poros and Penia, this is his fortune. First, he is ever poor, and far from being delicate and beautiful, as most people suppose. He is on the contrary rough and hard and homeless and unshod, ever lying on the ground without bedding, sleeping in doorsteps and beside roads under the open sky. Because he has his mother's nature, he dwells ever with want. But on the other hand, because of his father, he ever plots for good and beautiful things. Because he is courageous, eager, and intense, a clever hunter ever weaving some new device, desiring understanding and capable of it, a lover of wisdom through the whole of life, clever at enchantment, a sorcerer and a sophist. And he is by nature neither mortal nor immortal, but sometimes on the same day he lives and flourishes, whenever he is full of resource, but then he dies and comes back to life again, by reason of the nature of his father, though what is provided ever slips away, so that Eros is never rich, nor at a loss. So love is situated midway between poverty and plenty. It has nothing, and yet it never lacks for anything at the same time. It's also a pretty good description of Socrates himself, who's always walking around without any shoes on, in a rough, dirty garment. Socrates is said to have been incredibly ugly, with a big nose and bulging eyes. So on the outside he's ugly, but on the inside he is full of divine treasures, these ideas that we've been talking about, like goodness and justice and beauty and truth. So this is a description of love, but it's also a pretty apt description of Socrates himself. We're really going to have to skip through a lot, right? But this part of the dialogue reflects on mortality and immortality. Of course, as human beings, we know that we're going to die, and a large part of the dialogue is dedicated to the idea of impermanence. That the body eventually gets ill and dies, and we go through pain. And our bodies are, in a sense, falling apart all the time and regenerating themselves, right? As we just heard in that little selection. So there's part of this dialogue that almost sounds like it could be one of the sermons of the Buddha, where he does seem to be talking about impermanence. And yet, so we're temporal beings, we're mortal beings, and yet we have this desire for immortality, for eternity. Right? So how does a mortal being achieve immortality? Well, it turns out through procreation, through begetting. And begetting, remember this is Diotima speaking supposedly to Socrates. Begetting or procreation is the way that a mortal human being attains immortality. So we're on this point right here. So we could be referring to literal procreation, that is, having children. So we ourselves do not die, but our children will live on after we're gone. So we could be referring to literal procreation, but we could also be referring to other types of procreation. So skipping over to 209a. Others are pregnant in respect to their soul. For there are those who are still more fertile in their souls than in their bodies, with what pertains to soul, to conceive and bear. What then so pertains? Practical wisdom and the rest of virtue, which indeed all the poets are procreators, as many craftsmen are said to be inventors. But the greatest and most beautiful kind of practical wisdom by far she said, is that concerned with the right ordering of cities and households, for which the name is temperance and justice. There's a little bit of foreshadowing right there for what's coming ahead in the Republic. So one of the ways of procreation is politics, creating a just city. Another way is poetry, creating works of art that will survive after we're gone. So craftsmen, a craftsman could make a beautiful work of art that would survive, right? So even though we're mortal, we crave immortality, and we can achieve it through procreation or desire. The desire to create something that lives on beyond ourselves. Now we come to the part that's known as the ascent, or the ladder of love, which starts at 209e. This is where we begin to get into Platonic mysticism. Platonism and would later become Neoplatonism, which was a sort of religion, basically like a religious movement that does have its mystical aspects, okay, otherworldly aspects. So let's take a look at this ladder of love. We could say this is a method, a Platonic method of mysticism, starting at on page 151 in the Allen text, or at 210a at the beginning of the paragraph there. It is necessary, she said, for him who proceeds rightly to this thing to begin while still young by going to beautiful bodies, and first, if his guide guides rightly, to love one single body and beget their beautiful discourses. Next, to recognize that the beauty in any body whatever is akin to that in any other body, and if it is necessary to pursue the beautiful as it attaches to form, it is quite unreasonable to believe that the beauty in all bodies is not one and the same. Realizing this, he is constituted a lover of all beautiful bodies, and relaxes this vehemence for one, looking down on it and believing it of small importance. After this, he must come to believe that beauty in souls is more to be valued than in the body, so that even if someone good of soul has but slight bloom, it suffices for him. Skipping on down to the next paragraph, after practices, he must lead him into the various branches of knowledge, in order that he may see their beauty too. And skipping on down, having been turned toward the multitudinous ocean of the beautiful, and contemplating it, he begets many beautiful and imposing discourses and thoughts, and ungrudging love of wisdom, until, having at this point grown and waxed strong, he beholds a certain kind of knowledge which is one, and such that it is the following kind of beauty. So skipping to the next paragraph. Now we're getting to the real deal. He who has been educated in the things of love up to this point, beholding beautiful things rightly and in due order, will then suddenly, in an instant, proceeding at that point to the end of the things of love, see something marvelous, beautiful in nature. It is that, Socrates, for the sake of which, in fact, all his previous labors existed. Skipping over to the next page, at 211c. When someone ascending from things here through the right love of boys begins clearly to see that, the beautiful, he would pretty well touch the end. For this is the right way to proceed in matters of love, or to be led upward by another, beginning from these beautiful things here, to ascend ever upward for the sake of that, the beautiful, as though using the steps of a ladder. So let me see if I can just put this into my own words. So we start out with erotic love. In the Greek context, this was usually homoerotic love, the love of an older man for a younger man. So it was the job of the older man to be a mentor to the younger man, and there was also an intimate relationship there and a sexual relationship. It was not exactly the same as present-day homosexuality. It was a completely different institution. And yet it does have some of the features of what we would call homosexuality today. Anyway, the man sees in his beloved the beauty of that person's form. But if the relationship is a good one, if it's a virtuous relationship, then one person sees in the beloved that the beauty that attaches to this body also attaches to other bodies. And then as they begin to see the beauty that attaches to various different bodies, they also begin to see the beauty that attaches to the things of the mind, the different disciplines of human learning. And they see beauty, the beauty of the mind, and not just the beauty of the body. And as they contemplate that, the beauty in the various different methods of inquiry, then they come to think about the idea of beauty in itself. And to think, well, what would beauty look like if it were not attached to form? Okay? And then this becomes a mystical insight, right? Of beholding beauty itself, directly, unmediated. Beholding that, right? And by beholding that, the philosopher is lifted up out of material reality and beholds eternity itself. Okay, it's very difficult to explain this without saying that it's a kind of religious insight. It's a kind of a mystical experience. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on with the ascent. And maybe you can write down for yourself what you think the steps of this ascent are. And this also is borne out in the beginning of the Phaedo, where Socrates says that true philosophy is a preparation for death, because philosophy helps the soul to detach itself from the body. So he says that a man who has truly spent his life in philosophy has good reason to be confident when he is about to die, and that the philosophers are training themselves for dying and for being dead. In the Phaedo, it gets a little bit, the stance is a little bit more hardened, where it seems that the philosopher should even despise the body and should look upon only the soul as being good. So it's almost as though Plato's position gets a little bit stronger as we go through these dialogues. And we're going to go ahead and stop there for now.